Only need to mention 3 lovely words.
Go on. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to part 2 of our Trilogies video. In part 1, we looked at Lord of the Rings, introduced by Matthew to my right, your left, and we were introduced to the Star Wars original trilogy by James, my left, your right. So, to kick this video off, we're going to get straight into it, straight into Tom's mystery trilogy that we have no idea, and it is...
Barbara here would have probably been a dead giveaway.
Toy Story.
Only need to mention 3 lovely words.
Go on.
High School Musical.
I knew it.
And moving on to my trilogy to finish off this video.
Right. Just hear me out.
We are, because we're not going to be saying much on it. Go on.
I thought it was
Few
a joke.
minutes.
This is a dead serious man right here.
I might use size of squeaky chairs to try and do it over what he's talking about.
You got yourself a solid 3-part series.
Okay.
Knows its characters. It's got... You're not just talking about like sequels that are like just additional. Like it's a series that builds on from the last. High School Musical 2 is just one of the greatest sequels of all time.
And you'd bet on it, would you?
The best thing to come out of that the best thing to come out of that film is the meme where they're in the kitchen and they've gone and they've replaced the actual music with what it would have sounded like. It's just whacking pots. Just moving around. That's the best thing to come out of that film. Sorry, Tom, carry on.
No, honestly, you just don't really need to say too much more. You just need to
Go your own
experience
way.
it.
I was going to say that.
Right, yeah. It's just something that needs to experience, and I think that sums it up in terms of these iconic trilogies. We've got Star Wars, we've got Lord of the Rings. They're these moments in time, and I just think it's gonna be one of them, whether we like it or not. It already is, and it's not on the same level.
Glad you put that in there.
It's not the same bloody universe. Have you watched High School Musical?
I have watched the second one and I've watched some of the first one.
You watched the second one with no context on it.
Well,
Whoa, how did you know about this relationship
I
between
wasn't
Troy and
fully-
Gabrielle and why it breaks down? Why it's so important?
because I wasn't fully invested then.
Funny that. Funny that.
I was a kid when I watched it on Disney Channel, so I with my sister. So
But here we go. He worded it as mystery trilogy. I had to come out with something special. But Barbara was obviously here to represent Jurassic Park, which I just feel like out of all the honourable mentions, just needed to put on a bit of a spotlight.
We respect it.
Because that's the thing. You've got I feel like you've got a series where, again, drawing on from, say, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and these sort of iconic names that people go to, whether they're into them or not. You got a series that follows on from where Star Wars laid the groundwork of showing you what you can do with practical artwork, basically, but also then paving the way for a series like Lord of the Rings, showing you what could be done with a film. And,
I'm giggling because Tom's talking so seriously and analytically about High School Musical and comparing it in the same breath as Lord of the Rings and
are we
Star
not?
Wars.
He's on Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I was saying, we're on Jurassic Park.
moved along.
Oh, thank God for that. I missed Jurassic Park, sorry. I was generally...
It's a giveaway when he said that it come before Lord of the Rings.
generally in disbelief. Sorry, Tom, carry on. Jurassic Park.
I've broke Ben, and I'm proud. You've thrown me off now, but no, I think again just one of those moments where, particularly the first film, obviously, because that's what a lot of people are going to latch onto, showing what can be done. And I know at the time, I don't know the exact figures, but it was the most expensive film made at that time.
I think so.
And even if it wasn't, you just think what they could pack into that, and again, not rely or fall into the trap of going too heavy into even CGI, because you've got like that nice balance between what could be done practically and okay, let's actually use some of this new technology, but know its limits. And I think, say, Star Wars was the precursor to that, sort of knowing its boundaries, and then you've got something then like a big budget actual quest like Lord of the Rings, where they're having to really go to the next level. I think a series like Jurassic Park really sort of shown just not to have that restraint, just like be creative with these series, even if it is a series that is just like taking an original idea, let's come up with these sequels because it's successful, because that's basically what happened.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They didn't know they were going to do a trilogy when they started, did they? Whereas the two we spoke about, I feel like they knew they were going to do more than one film before filming the first one. So with what you said, it does give a little bit more creative control, which sometimes hampers trilogies, because you go on to the next one and they're just doing it off the success of the first one, just for money's purposes, and then you think it's not as good. But sometimes there's a benefit to a trilogy because you can completely go off on a different creative field with the next one or whatever, and elevate it to a new level.
Yeah.
But I've not seen Jurassic Park or the other one, so I'm not sure how similar the sequels are to the original.
Yeah.
So you've never watched the original? Neither have I, if I'm being honest.
Wow.
I don't. And for all the hype and
Then again, I don't see Lord of the Rings, so there we go.
and it brings me to that point of all the hype that surrounded it, and all the at the time when it was released, and even growing up, people talking about Jurassic Park and how brilliant it is. Never looked at it and gone, I really want to watch that.
Yeah.
It's never sort of drawn me in or gripped me in the sense of these people created dinosaurs or found dinosaurs and created this world of dinosaurs or whatever the story may be.
Then again, that comes to the point. It's like you're describing like the story really, and but also was one of the things I was going to bring up is the fact that they did it regardless. They did make it accessible, and that's still your experience of it because of how many people had such an attachment to it. But you're taking something that's like a horror sci-fi, which is an adaptation, but making that accessible, and does sort of link to what I was saying about that with that mass appeal kind of feel. I feel like it paid off.
What is the genre of Jurassic Park? Because I've tell a lie, I've seen clips and I've seen parts of it. I've never watched the film in whole. I think it's just the first one, but there's a scene that's genuinely horrifying where they're in, I think it's a kitchen, and there's these velociraptors just stalking around the kitchen. That is one of the most horrifying clips of film I've ever seen. This genuinely creates sheer panic in the audience watching it.
Yeah, and I think that's where it sort of comes into the fact that, because I didn't know till, I think it is sort of fairly just like passed by, because it's just a singular, it's just a singular book, but it's a book
I was just
adaptation.
going to say, is it or not? I'm sure it is an adaptation.
But it's very different in my understanding, but I think that's why I've understood it, that basically if you were to take the book, you just see it as like, oh, this is a horror sci-fi. It's like deep into what the implications of it all are, but it's also just terrifying. Whereas I think the movie then basically takes the structure of that story, but leaves a hell of a lot of the actual implications and the actual human sort of horror of it all. To then be able to tell like not even a family friendly story, but like a story about the people and just this almost adventure type feel. So I think that's what then maybe sort of just carries all of that, but they're smart enough to then draw on some of that horror and keep dipping it in, which I think is what they'd like to think they're going to keep doing with the franchise. But I watched Jurassic World and then just...
Have you watched all of Jurassic World?
Was not bothered.
It's one of the worst things I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, because I've not properly watched the original trilogy. Watching Jurassic World, the first two films, I
didn't even bother.
It's one of those films you'd put on in the background.
Yeah.
If you'd seen it or not seen it, you'd put it in the background, you wouldn't care for it.
Yeah, they went to sort of where I said like they went more sort of clearly more mainstream than whatever the source material was, and it was a case of just it's a bit more adventure based and everything like that. I think with Jurassic World, it's like let's just do like a action movie type feel.
Yeah.
And I could easily, especially someone that loves actually, be it like practical effects, like actual sort of like handcrafted work. I could easily just look at say something like Jurassic World and just go, oh yeah, but it's just all CGI, it's just all this and it's like that's not my problem though.
Yeah.
Like, and it's never my problem with stuff like that. Like you can have literally just, it's the fact that it relies on it.
Yeah.
And I think I could pick this out on, again, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. They knew what their boundaries were. I think even at the time, say, such a bigger scale project, if they know not to just rely on some of the technology they've got,
Yeah.
or some of the facilities they do have at hand, then those boundaries help them squeeze the best out of it, rather than just go, oh, we can do all this, so let's just do all this, and not have to think about it too much. So it comes back to the originals of Jurassic World, of Jurassic Park, all three of them to be fair, of knowing what to do, knowing what not to do, and knowing what they are. They're consistent. They can bookend it where they are. Admittedly, they didn't, and the plan wasn't to, as far as I was aware, because they were successful. And some of the plans, me personally, I don't like the idea of, but I think as it stands, they're bookended. They know what they are, and there's that consistency.
Stick to the status quo, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Moving on.
So forward and be who you are.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, 3 solid trilogies introduced so far, and 1 trilogy that turned me into an absolute shambles, to be fair. Didn't know what day it was or what was going on.
I think you're back.
Genuinely, I didn't even hear Jurassic Park. They're probably just giggling to myself over here thinking, what is going on? Right.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tom, I appreciate that. Last trilogy that we're going to introduce as one of our 4 is my trilogy. My favourite trilogy that's released, don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars and I love Lord of the Rings, but for me, yeah, Jurassic Park, not seen it, don't care. There you go.
And you love...
Oh, High School Musical is... Oh, it's just up there.
That's why it doesn't need to be mentioned.
Yeah.
The complete other one.
Yeah.
One of the greats.
Yeah. So, my trilogy is the Dark Knight trilogy, directed by Christopher Nolan. I mean, this was probably one of the first superhero movies I watched properly and enjoyed properly. To get me into everything, and it was I mean, I love Marvel more than anything, but Batman to me is up there with Daredevil as my favourite superhero, completely out of anything. And when we talk about the Dark Knight trilogy, we talked about CGI, you mentioned it. Very little CGI used in the trilogy to make it as realistic as possible, and the fact that it's hard, it doesn't use a lot of it. Yes, it does use it, obviously.
Yeah, and all the unnoticeable.
Yeah. But a lot of it isn't, and it creates that sense of realism. It creates a story of a superhero that actually could happen. There's nothing that's too outrageous. Yeah, obviously you've got the tank cars, but we've got cars with guns on the back of these now. You've got helicopters that can fly in cities and so on. So it's nothing that's too outlandish or out there. Okay. And I felt like the trilogy was developed around Batman's human qualities, not the fact that he was this superhero, but the fact Batman or Bruce Wayne was pretending to be Bruce Wayne, that Bruce Wayne was just this facade that he put on, and Batman was the actual character that he was trying to be. I felt the story development and the character development of Christian Bale's Batman is sensational. You talk about continuous films, although there's quite a big chunk in between the second one, the last one, and probably the first one and the second one, not a massive chunk, but a little bit. It still continues, you can still watch it and not need to know what happens in those parts. You understand what's going on. The villains, Jesus.
I think you have one of the best villains ever in that trilogy.
Yeah, 100%.
You're talking Bane, right?
But joking aside, you've got Ra's al Ghul, Liam Neeson, stupendous. You've got Heath Ledger, the Joker, just absolutely on another level of a planet. And Bane, Tom Hardy, all characters which broke down our main character and made him feel human, normal, that he wasn't going to win. They weren't there just to be defeated, they were there to develop this character.
They were all in that different way, didn't they?
Yeah,
really well.
And it wasn't similar, it was all completely different. Like the Joker, mentally. Ra's al Ghul was this leader he looked up to, thought he was dead. And Bane, I mean...
physically broken.
Yeah. Right. They are incredible. I mean, you talk about villains in superhero films, I don't think you can top those three.
Especially not Joker.
Yeah.
Yeah. All three of them have a case. Even Two-Face has a case of being up there as one of the best villains.
Yeah, Harvey Dent too, yeah.
Yeah, but when it comes to comic book villains, Heath Ledger's Joker is the best one for me. Easily the best one. I like Thanos is up there, but I just think what Heath Ledger brought to that role that hadn't been seen before from the Joker, and everyone thought he was going to suck, basically.
Yeah.
And how he just went from everyone's expectations being down here to as high as they could possibly go with what he'd done with the role. With the scenes with Batman where he's just having one-on-one dialogue, some of the best scenes in that film.
They're absolutely amazing. And I've seen, I think it was Christopher Nolan talking about it and Christian Bale talking about it, how Heath Ledger wouldn't even look at the script or use the script. He'd just talk how he thought the Joker would talk at that moment, and the dialogue that's come out of Heath Ledger just doing that, a lot of it's still incorporated into the film. And to me, possibly the best depiction of a villain ever, completely. And the villain, focusing on the Joker, I'm not even talking about the whole trilogy, but focusing on the Joker, he was evil, yes, but his main obsession was surrounded with Batman and everything linked to Batman. He wasn't there to be defeated. We saw this human, because he didn't offer anything else. He wasn't powerful or ridiculous or super strong or this mystical character that had all this army. It was one man that manipulated and tortured and tormented Batman to bring him to his very knees and break down of what Batman stood for as a hero. And
just for fun as well.
Yeah.
There's no real motive to it.
No,
he enjoyed it.
Which made it even better because it was so sinister, it was so dark.
Sort of led on to everyone speculating onwards and really being active, knowing full well you're never going to get some of these answers, but you're still invested in that world, which I think again is a credit to that trilogy not being its own thing, and it's not. It was fortunate enough to not be attached to some other properties that it could have been, in like a wider universe or something.
No.
Because the fans are left with it, and they're just they build it even bigger than it was made on screen.
Yeah, 100%. And the fact that they've told it in this contained universe as well, I think is why it's so successful. There's no need to bring in other superheroes or other ridiculous characters. Everyone that's used in it are main characters associated with Batman, which is nice. So they've not felt the need to bring other people in here like Marvel do, just add the odd cameo in sometimes, or DC what they're doing now, add the odd cameo. I think that's why we're so excited for the new Batman film, because it's its own contained universe.
Well,
there's its own characters that are going to be different and built individually, which is going to make it a lot more exciting for us to watch.
Yeah, that was a big thing, like, sort of coming off that, like, growing up, obviously, the only films we had out was, like, the Keaton films, like the Tim Burton and the Schumacher films. So I grew up with them anyway, and I mean, like, watching them, and then seeing this, like, Batman Begins being released when I was, like, what, 10 or 11?
Yeah.
I remember I was going to cinema with Dad to see it, and it was just the most, it was so almost bizarre seeing a superhero movie like that, because up till that point then the only things that had sort of been released were like the Spider-Man films and the X-Men films, which were in themselves quite different, but still had that comic book sort of vibe. This felt like its own thing where it wasn't necessarily...
They're just using a comic book character.
They were just using... Exactly, it wasn't a comic book movie. And it was so weird. I don't know if it was just because I was a kid, but watching this character that you know, in that sort of... in the way they'd sort of presented it, it was jarring in such a good way.
Yeah.
It was like generally just like, this is one of the most insane things I've seen.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the way they obviously continued it as well. Each film after, I mean, Dark Knight just went through the roof, didn't it?
Yeah. But even Dark Knight Rises as well, it carried on this idea that the Batman was broken, he'd gone, people were against him, and sort of rebuilding that image and bringing that hope back to people who still believed in the Batman. I thought it was fantastic. I'm happy they finished it where they did. I'm happy they didn't carry it on. I'm happy that, is it, what's his name? Joseph Gordon Hewitt Levitt? What's his name? Gordon Levitt. I'm happy they didn't have him carry on as Batman. It finished, and that's exactly where it needed to finish. And someone carry on the mantle, but then we can create that story for ourselves. It didn't need to try and be something else or make another film for the sake of it.
It was, oh shit, I've just gone from one of them.
Yeah, you can sort of interpret your own sort of endings from it as well. Like, there's a few scenes in there which people interpret differently for how it ends, and I like films that do that sort of thing. So some people think that the end scene isn't actually that like real, or he's actually still dead, and there's Alfred envisioning him there. Some people think he is alive, and some people think Gordon Levitt's going to be Batman. Some people think he's going to do his own thing and be Robin or whatever. There's so many different options for people to fall back on. Whatever they like, as they choose to have the ending be, that could be what it is.
Christian Bale was interviewed about the ending. Have you seen that?
No.
So he actually says what the ending's supposed to be. I'm not going to say it. If you want to, you can watch it. Because like we said, it's nice that we can create up our own sort of ending of it and what happens. Talking about Batman, I think this trilogy's the main reason, or one of the main reasons why we expect Batman to be this thriller, drama, gritty tone, atmosphere, dark, tense sort of story that's being developed, because it was done so well, and it did it without crossing the PG line. It was 12, every film was 12A, 12A, 12A. So it was still accessible for this wide audience, but it was also so close to being just completely over the top and gory and bloody and just really dark. And I feel like this trilogy is part of the reason why we expect Batman or enjoy Batman being so, or its superhero films being so dark. It's different, so different.
But yeah, it was accessible because of that whole. They're using a superhero, but it's not a superhero comic book film. They're just using that character in a film, and obviously there can be drawbacks to that, but obviously that's how it was so widely accessible. But then it's infiltrated everyone's brains thinking that. Obviously, a lot of people that maybe did have the background of some of the comic books had already had that grounding in thinking, oh no, we know what we want from Batman, otherwise they wouldn't have made Batman films like Dark Knight Trilogy. But as far as general audiences go, yeah, I think it's responsible for all of that and leads us to where we are now, anticipating this next Batman film, which again, it doesn't feel like that much time has passed, but already our sort of like the general culture of everyone, the sensibilities have changed again, whereas now, like we mentioned it in talking about the Batman, saying it's not R-rated, but it's going to be pretty close.
Yeah.
And I think everyone felt like that about the Dark Knight trilogy at the time, whereas if we watched it now, we'd be like, no, it's kind of normal. It's kind of like what we expect from movies now. Like.
Yeah, exactly. My other points was the dialogue, but you've already touched on that. Sorry, the dialogue is in all three films actually. What I appreciate that Christopher Nolan does is allow characters to interact with one another and have this lengthy dialogue for us to sort of understand their relationship, their morals as characters. Even talking to Alfred, talking to Selena Kyle, talking to Ra's al Ghul, talking to Rachel, for God's sake, Harvey Dent, all these little dialogues that were going on that were quite lengthy, because it wasn't just action all the time, but it allowed us to sort of gain understanding for these characters and really appreciate who they were and the morals that they shown or had for one another. I just, as a trilogy, it's amazing, and like Matt, I'd happily watch these three over and over and over.
Yeah,
and over again.
the Dark Knight is my second favourite film of all time. This trilogy is my second favourite trilogy. So yeah. I feel like the Batman as well, what we're all excited for that is this the groundwork for that.
Yes.
Why everyone's so excited to have this type of film back again.
Yes.
Although I feel like it will be a slight different tone and it's not going to be exactly the same, but it's just the type of excitement for these types of films that are coming. This did the groundwork for that, of how good they were.
Yeah.
100%.
That was actually going to be one of the small, tiny, like petty gripes I was going to bring up, in the fact that it completely justifies it and wins it in the fact that the trilogy and the choices are made to focus around him as a character.
Yeah.
So it ends up not being that relevant, but like the interpretations that we did grow up with, especially with DC and their stories existing a lot more in other places, whereas Marvel seemed to jump on the idea that it was translatable with the real world. Yeah. Like you could walk down the same street that Spider-Man was going down or something. Whereas DC, just in the fact that they actively name different places, it's like made up places, instantly sort of changes people's minds. It's so simple, but in that respect, the Gotham we knew from, say, some of these older interpretations, but also what seems to be the case from the new Batman film, Gotham's going to be recognisable, whereas I felt like in Dark Knight Trilogy it wasn't the important factor, so it was just a city.
Yeah, it was a place for the action and the storyline to take place.
It just so happened to be there. It wasn't like it was this relevant part, but I'm looking forward to seeing that again, which is again part of the fact that I do see that it's this new movie is going to be a different tone, but completely agree that obviously the Dark Knight Trilogy, we probably wouldn't be seeing this kind of movie coming out if it wasn't for this trilogy.
Agreed.
Well, that thing we've got from like visually, the way they sort of laid it, well, obviously compared to like the Burton films and that, you got all this mad colour all the time and just these ridiculous looking sets. Whereas this, it just felt, you really felt the scale of it, like it was this massive sort of thing like New York or something, but at the same time you haven't got all that mad stuff going on like New York. It was, it sounds really daft, almost made it feel kind of claustrophobic because it's just all grey or like this sandy sort of colour. There's nothing actually going on.
No.
So it doesn't take, I mean, because all that sort of stuff in those Burton films and Schumacher stuff, it is quite distracting because it's just bam, 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 that's all there, isn't it? Whereas this, like you were saying, it wasn't the main thing about it, just the actual visual side of it. That always strikes me quite a lot when you watch that.
That's great.
It's just like everything just seems so vast and huge, but at the same time just like really
Yeah.
claustrophobic. Like, I'd feel really uncomfortable walking through there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, 100%.
And it gives you that sense when you're watching it, like it isn't a nice place to be.
Yeah.
Almost.
So it's still, in that respect it still works, but it's mainly, I think it's then through that focus on the characters and
Exactly,
that story.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm all up there on the same page.
Oh, one thing.
Oh.
Does it not bother everyone else that the first film's called Batman Begins and the other two are called The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises?
Yeah,
That first one,
Because
it's
then
as
it's
if he
just
went, right, we've got to do this one
encapsulated.
film, and then they went, oh no, you can do the sequels now. I was like, oh right, I'll call it The Dark Knight, that's cool, and then I feel like I should have done a different
Dark Knight
title for the
Rises.
last one.
Yeah.
Just so they've got something separate. Because now it just makes it look like he didn't think
Yeah,
about
and
Batman Begins, doesn't it?
Well, there's loads of-
oh mate, come on.
There's loads
I
of
want consistency. Right?
fan theories as well that go on about how they should be named differently because of what happens in each one, but I'm not going to go into that because I want to move on because we're going to finish it on a high. It's really good. Thank you very much for listening. Right, what we're going to do now is just go through some other trilogies for sort of honourable mentions, and we're going to talk about the highest grossing trilogies. I have done some research and I do have the top 10 highest grossing trilogies. We will talk about them briefly, probably.
Quite surprising as well, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I'm a bit like,
Some of them you wouldn't expect. So we're going to talk about that and then talk about some honourable mentions as well, because we appreciate that the Lord of the Rings, Jurassic Park, Star Wars and the Dark Knight trilogy
High School Musical.
and might not be your
you
might
won't
not-
ever let it go, will you?
might not be your favourite trilogies, but we are going to try and talk about that. But we are aware of time, so it might not be a lengthy response based on your favourite trilogy or various different trilogies. But yeah, we'll try and fit as much in. So, talking about the highest grossing trilogies, at number 10 is How to Train Your Dragon, that brought in $1.63 billion.
That's fair.
It is, but I just never expected it to be in the
I wouldn't
top
know.
10.
I never expected it to be that popular.
Yeah,
I
I'd put
enjoy the
something like
films.
Shrek above
But
that.
I think it's on.
Because that's DreamWorks, isn't it?
It is, yeah, but Shrek's weird because there's 4.
And also it's
Yeah,
on.
but
This
no one
is
counts that.
strictly no one. I'm completely with you. I love Shrek as a trilogy. It would be insane.
I actually think the fourth one's better than the third one.
I didn't like the third one.
Don't get me wrong, but the third one's bang average, but the fourth one's just I don't like it.
I thought it was alright.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, we don't count that one. But yeah, I mean, How to Train Your Dragon number 10.
It's on the tail. of
It's solid.
movies like
Good
Shrek.
work. Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
where it comes
They're
from.
hitting that sort of same.
Because we're talking
level,
like
aren't they?
money at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's what attracts people, I suppose. If you get a dragon about a dragon and a boy that. To be fair, I quite like the fact that they grow up together and they sort of build this relationship with one another and that trust and the sort of. Yeah, but there's also deeper meanings in it as well. Sort of like his relationship with his father and trying to be someone who he expects him to be, but actually,
That's
he's
one of the
allowed
coolest
to
things.
develop his own.
That giant dragon thing that comes out in, is it the second film?
No, I think it's the end of the first.
Is it in the first
No,
one?
well, I mean, the
Nuts.
first one
I was like,
happens,
what?
then the second one there's a bigger one, and then the third one there's even bigger threat.
Right, yeah.
So,
Alright, so it's the same thing. I just remember that
Yeah.
first one being like, that's so cool.
yeah.
Like, I love the work.
Yeah.
That was ridiculous.
Number 9, might find surprising, is the Star Wars original trilogy that brought in $1.8 billion. Thoughts? Number 9.
Well, back then,
Yeah.
that is raking it in, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's like absolute madness back then. If you think what $1 billion must have like been worth
Yeah.
through the 70s and 80s.
No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. I thought you would have taken that worse, actually. But now you've put that into that
Put it
sort
in
of context.
perspective. And now if you
perspective,
do the inflation thing to now, it'd probably floor the rest of these.
Yeah.
Well, more to the point, it's just a case of like just the sequel, the prequels and beyond. It's just like there was the interest, whereas you
No,
come
that is
out
the
with
point.
those
This was a
movies,
brand new
there
thing,
that.
then, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It's
it's
that
completely
interest. Yeah.
left field. 8, the Captain America trilogy. $2.25 billion. What, that it's on the
Yeah,
list?
top
or
10.
8, really?
Because I don't know, I just thought
Do you not
I thought
think
the
that...
like just the Avengers films would floor that.
But...
Completely as a well, I don't know how they're not trilogy technically.
No,
are they?
they're
Either.
not. Forced.
So I just see
Four,
Infinity and
three,
Endgame sort of the same.
Amateur hour over it. I feel like that should be higher, especially
It's one of
with
my
the next
favourite
one.
trilogies out of
But
MCU.
That, Captain America, especially his Winter Soldier film, I thought redefined what Marvel films were going forward.
Yeah. That's what got me into Marvel. That film.
Yeah.
That will change my opinion on the MCU.
Yeah.
Because Captain America.
Yeah. And mine.
I'd say it's the strongest trilogy out of the lot, really. For me.
Thor second film absolutely atrocious.
Which one?
Thor.
Oh yeah.
I'm just saying
Iron Man.
there's a trilogy of 3 solid films.
Yeah.
Cap's the one that's got those 3 solid films.
But as well, the things as well. The third one's not solely Captain America, is it? It's Civil War.
It's Avengers.
It's Avengers. Yeah, it is, and it's like.
But the story is still based around. Is mainly based around him and Bucky.
Yeah.
Still, so it is a nice continuation on from that second one.
7 Ironman Trilogy, $2.4 billion. I'm surprised it's in the top 10.
I am, but I was only surprised.
Do you remember when that got released?
Yeah, it was exactly.
Yeah. Do you know the Ironman Trilogy came, or the Ironman film came to being filmed? So Marvel didn't have any of the rights to their own superhero characters.
Oh yeah.
Like Spider-Man, X-Men, everyone else. Yeah, they sold them all off. So what they did is they created these prototype toys, gave them to kids, and went, "Which one would you want to play with?" Or showing them these characters, and went, "Which one would you prefer to play with?" And they all chose Iron Man because they're gadgets. So they went, "Okay, that's the first film that we're going to make." Made Iron Man, and Jesus Christ, never looked back since. No. Because Iron Man isn't as big as people make.
Well, that's the cool thing I love about the MCU, because they'd sold off like Spider-Man and X-Men because they were going bankrupt basically.
Oh, yeah, that's why they sold them.
Sold them all off.
Yeah, it was like...
So they were left with literally their B-list heroes, which were massive in the 60s because that's all they had.
Yeah.
But then if you ain't got the X-Men and Spider-Man, they're the first sort of things that people think of in Marvel, aren't they? So
Fantastic Four were massive as well.
Exactly, that's what I love about the MCU. They literally took these characters and went, "So what we got to work with them."
Yeah.
Well, that's what was said.
And they made something of it.
Yeah, they just said something like either Iron Man works.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
We're not going to bother. We don't exist.
And thankfully, it did. John Favreau, what a man. 6 Dark Knight Trilogy, 2.46 billion.
Oh, I thought that'd be higher, to be honest.
The reason, and I looked into this because it's my favourite trilogy, if you don't already know. I looked into it. So the last 2 films together, they both brought in $1 billion or around that, or a bit above. So the Dark Knight and the Dark Knight Rises make up the $2 billion. The 460 million is from the first film, Batman Begins. Because I don't think people were anticipating.
Well, again, it was such a drastic change. People aren't going to. They're
exactly.
a bit funny about taking the risk on it.
Yeah, exactly. People don't like change, especially when they're so used to Michael Keaton and Val Kilmer and.
Yeah, I think George Clooney's take on Batman sort of hampered the success of.
Well, of course, that's going to put people lose faith in it. Of course.
Yes.
So Batman Begins reeled everyone back in, but it needed it just needed to be out before I don't know how to word it, but it needed to. No, go on.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of people watched that film after it was released.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Because people watched it, it was like, oh, actually, this is really good,
Yeah,
and then they were like, okay, right.
I remember being in the cinema and there weren't many people in there.
No,
like at all for that one.
Making it, they had to risk like the fact that it was going to be like a momentum. It wasn't going to be like an instant hit. It was just going to be right. Okay, this is going to build. We've got to hope that we're right in thinking that this
Actually,
is going
I feel like the
become something else.
Only really heard it was only when Dark Knight hit then people seemed to go back to that and realise just how good it was.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. 5 Star Wars prequel, $2.5 billion. Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith.
Because again, it's that whether people were excited or like worried.
Star Wars.
After the first one, you're going to be a little bit worried of what's happening, especially the amount of screen time Jar Jar Binks got.
But what that is basically it's like the first one was excitement, worrying, or it's newcomers that, as in kids that haven't watched the originals, or maybe have but barely.
There's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon of the original.
Jumping.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I reckon the Phantom Menace would have the most out of those 3. I don't know, but if I had to guess.
I think, from looking, I think it was Revenge of the Sith.
Oh, really?
Or was it?
I don't know. It sort of makes sense.
I don't know. That's what I'd guess.
Personally, so if I'm going completely off, because I can't remember what I've researched, that's terrible. But going personally, I'd probably say Revenge of the Sith would have brought more in. But I don't know if that's
the best film. But
100%.
I just think because of the success of the originals, everyone would be so hyped
the
for
actual
Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
And then because the Phantom Menace was such a letdown, people wouldn't have
There'd
bothered
been-
with the second and third one, if you see what I mean. But
Yeah,
everyone bothered with the first one because of
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
if you
sense.
see like footage of people like just running for the merch and everything, when that first one was released, it was just such a hype fest.
Yeah.
Because Onward Star Wars was back after about 15 odd years or something, whatever it was. So
Sounds a bit underwhelming. Number 4, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. And I put 2.5 billion, so I rounded it, but I think it was like hundreds of thousands why it was for. $2.5 billion, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy.
surely that's off the first one. A lot of that, like the big thing.
Then again,
Yes.
it was the only. It was one of. I know you got the X-Men.
X-Men's
other
just
movies
been
and
out like a
stuff,
year
but
before. haven't
It's one of the only ways. It was one of the only types of movies like that people literally had access to.
I'm confident, I'm scared to say it because I doubt myself all the time, confident the highest grossing one out of all those 3 films is the third one.
I would have
Probably.
thought so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be the first one.
Should be, but it's
But now you've said it,
definitely,
yeah.
I'm backing myself, it's definitely the
Because
third
again,
one.
remember,
We were well
I think
into
there's the
superhero
excitement, but
Well,
yeah.
it was the second film. You had an unpopular opinion on it, but a lot of people loved the second film and therefore went into the third one thinking,
Yeah.
okay, this is going to be something amazing.
That's what I mean about it being in the superhero hop, because we'd had all of a sudden you had all these other ones popping up, like let's try doing Fantastic Four. We got the Dark Knight trilogy started at that point as well, hadn't we? What was the other thing that was coming through? It was like 2006 time, wasn't it?
Hulk, maybe.
Well, yeah, those actually, yeah, they've done all those sort of things, haven't they?
Oh yeah.
This was just that weird little, that weird little cluster before
Yeah.
the MCU just went, here we are.
And not just the MCU,
Fantastic
but the
Four
way
as well.
of those kind of movies.
Just said sorry, yeah. I don't know, I'm still thinking High School Musical.
Yeah.
And 3, High School Music, no. 3's The Hobbit, $2.93 billion.
Yeah.
Now, I have tried to sit through all these 3, and the 3 film, some of the only 3 films I've never got to the end of because I just fell asleep in them.
I was interested, because I know you've mentioned that before, so when I read that I thought, I know James is going to disagree with that. I'm interested in what you think. I don't think I've hardly spoke to you about Hobbit, or not in grave
I always
detail.
hear such like different appearance.
What are your thoughts on it? Because you're such a big fan of Lord of the
It
Rings.
doesn't compare to Lord of the Rings. It doesn't. It is. I like it. I think it's good because I'm so invested in that world and universe, and I think there are positives to it. But I feel like you have to be a massive Lord of the Rings fan to enjoy The Hobbit. Because if you watch The Hobbit without watching Lord of the Rings, I feel like they don't hold as strong on their own. Like
No. I know exactly what you're saying, and that makes a lot of sense.
they're more nostalgic, building off the first 3 than they are telling their own sort of story. Because The Hobbit should only really be one movie because of the size of the book, really.
Have you read the book?
I haven't.
This is the only film I think I'm saying this on that I think the book's better than the trilogy. But I never thought I'd say that. So
The trilogy had stuff in it that isn't even in the book because they just wanted to make as much money as possible and extend it to another trilogy.
So Legolas wasn't supposed to be there.
No, he's not in the book.
There you go.
The other thing with that as well, The Hobbit, I didn't like. I love the fact that with Lord of the Rings they put the effort in with all the makeup and all the a lot of the practical stuff, but then it meant The Hobbit looked so cheap because they just went all out on the CGI.
And I was
like, that was another thing that always put me off with that because I was just like, oh shit.
Well, it's like they've gone, we've got this technology now, let's use it, let's go against what worked for us.
It's like knowing when to just not use something or use something. Because obviously there was still a lot of work going into it, but you don't see the work that goes into it because they just went and just opened the dams and all of that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you really appreciate all the little tiny details that you shouldn't even be able to pick up on something like Lord of the Rings because they don't mar it or cover it with anything else.
Yeah. 2 Lord of the Rings, $2.99 billion. Can't argue that. And then, number 1 by a considerable amount as well. Star Wars trilogy, the sequels, $4.47 billion.
Because like I said earlier, the amount of hype that Force Awakens
Oh
was.
my god, that I think that's in the top 10 films anyway. For grossing, but yeah, I mean,
like those 2 years after they announced, we're doing a new Star Wars film. Can you just remember how mad that was?
Yeah, it was. And then I think the first 2 weeks at least, every screening was full.
I saw it 4 times in the cinema.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And then
I stand by that film.
second one fell a little bit flat,
but I
first one was brilliant.
Force Awakens.
Yeah,
It did exactly what it needed to do.
I agree with you.
And they knew what they were doing. They knew how to do it. And then it's just not having the plan for the other two that they shot themselves in the foot with. I tried so hard to love them, and at the time I did love them because it's Star Wars, and I wanted to love it and love it so much. I didn't want to hate something about it. Yes, I've had a couple of years to mull them over now, and I do have big problems with them.
Yeah.
As do everyone else.
Yeah.
And I fully accept that now.
But that could be another video.
It can.
Yeah.
Because that's why I'm so funny about stuff with like when I've said about Spider-Man and stuff in the past now, because I'm scared that Marvel are going to do a Star Wars on us.
Yeah.
And that's just how it feels to me now. So that's why I'm such a bitch about stuff now.
Yeah.
Because Star Wars ruined me. I trusted them and they let me down.
Look, when someone breaks your trust, that's it.
It comes from a place of love.
Yeah. Right.
I bloody love my Star Wars.
So, we have obviously talked about our favourites, and we've sort of talked about the top 10 list as well. There are mentions like The Godfather, The Hangover, The Matrix, Cars, The Da Vinci Code, the Cornetto Trilogy, Back to the Future, Mad Max, Indiana Jones and so on, Spy Kids. But obviously we don't have time to talk about those because this video could go on for a ridiculous amount of time. So, we're going to bring it on to there. Would anyone like to add anything?
Do you ever think a trilogy is a bit like a good sandwich? Usually, it's like you got
with the way they're laid out. You have like the first film's usually like a good bit of bread, like that's alright.
Okay.
Then you get the second one, which is like an absolutely banging filling, which makes the whole thing, and then another nice bit of bread on the other side.
So you're saying the second film's always the best?
Or it can go the other way, where it's sometimes it's just like, I've got a proper good bag of bread
sandwich.
and then it's like, oh shit, that film weren't as good as I thought.
Yeah,
You've
had to rush. Yeah,
you've had to rush it. You're like, oh shit, yeah. And then you still save it with a nice bit of bread then at the end.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like you got either or.
Well, I feel like
Either that.
Hang on.
Oh shit, the bread's mouldy.
We'll leave you with that analogy. That was tremendous.
There you go.
Right, thank you for watching. We appreciate every person that watches this and every view. We've got more than we could ever possibly imagine, so thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed it. That wraps up our trilogies, and we shall see you in the next one. Bye everyone.